I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Evan Stevens Hall, and this is the 2022 Roundup edition of the Concavity Show.
Last month in Alaska, the pattern of my life laid out, and I asked what I've been asking you, like trees repeat like numerals do, like the ladder to the
Yeah.
And you were not hearing things. That was our guest, Pinegrove, Evan Stevens Hall of Pinegrove, that you were just listening to. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But thank you for letting us use that piece of music to open the show. We're really excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. Yeah, as Matt said, you are the lead singer of the band Pinegrove, which you're originally from New Jersey, but now you guys find yourself in kind of upstate New York. And I guess I describe Pinegrove as kind of like a rock band that's also sometimes folky and sometimes got some alt country elements to it. I think you once classified it as language arts rock in an interview, which I laughed at. I thought that was great. So like a lot of your lyrical themes tend to be pretty literary, often very political, and like really evocative and highly introspective about your own self as the primary songwriter. You guys have a brand new album called 1111 that came out this year. It was one of my favorite albums of 2022. We'll talk about that in our bonus section.
Thank you.
And I love, like, so for example, on track 1, Habitat, there is a George Saunders short story title right in the lyrics. And my brain exploded a little bit when I heard that for the first time. And I was like, yes, this is awesome. So lots of great overlap between stuff we talk about a lot and think about a lot and what's going on for you guys over there. So that's great. So I guess the way we got connected is one day you just followed our Instagram Concavity Show, and I always make a point of like looking at the person's profile, follow them back, and then I was like, hey, I recognize this guy. And then I was like, wait a second, this guy's the singer of Pinegrove. Holy shit, this is awesome. And then we had a little bit back and forth about books, and you always post on your personal account on Instagram your year roundup in books, and that really just got me thinking like, oh, it'd be great to talk to Evan sometime on the show. We love his music. We're big fans. Also, he does this year-end thing with books. We've done that for years. What a great fit. And so here you are. That's how we got together. So thanks for that.
Perfect match.
Yeah, no doubt. How did you find us, by the way? Like, what was the connection there?
I mean, you know how it is. Sometimes you're just surfing the web and you end
Totally.
up somewhere and it's like, this is cool.
Yeah, follow hashtag for David Foster Wallace or something. And
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was what Dave is saying, like on your Instagram page, like clearly you're a prolific reader that comes through in your work. And it looks like, I mean, just from, I don't know you, but it looks like you spend a lot of time reading. So it's exciting for us to talk to. It's like someone
more than I do.
Loves reading
by far.
Maybe more than we do. So that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
How much would you say you spend your time between reading and, I don't know, music stuff?
Well, I think actually for a long time I've been doing more with the page than I have with, I mean, certainly I read more than I listen to music. Mm-hmm. And writing it, I'm really only in that headspace when, there are kind of particular conditions that bring me there. And we've been touring a lot in 2022. So I've written some new songs, but not many. And on tour, when we're playing every day, I'm spending so much time reading because that's really the best way to, I don't know, just like preserve my energy and stay sane.
Yeah.
So the answer is probably like almost like an 80-20 in favor of reading.
Yeah.
Wow. So you guys just finished this tour and you're kind of between stuff now. Like, are you working on new stuff now? Or are you kind of just decompressing after 2022?
I'm actually applying to grad school.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Cool. For master's in English. I graduated 11 years ago from undergrad, and for a long time I've been kind of interested in getting back in there. And
yeah. And you went to Kenyon College, which of course is like going to be of point of interest for our listeners. Wallace's famous commencement speech being there and all that.
Yeah,
I guess that was a little bit before you were there.
It was
by a handful of years, yeah.
But I've seen it, of course, and actually they have. I really disagree with this decision that Kenyon's made, but they have a proprietary viewing opportunity only for graduating seniors. Like, this is a video that's in their archives.
Oh, okay.
And they only let you watch the video.
Oh, yeah. I've never actually seen it.
Right. It's in the library archives, and you can find audio of it on YouTube or wherever it's published as its own text. Yeah, right. But to watch the video, you have to be a graduating senior.
Oh, interesting.
I don't like that at all, personally.
Yeah, I personally don't either, because I'm not one of them. So I'd love to see
it. Fans of Infinite Jest who are curious about a mysterious videotape. That never...
True, I'm sure they're playing off that.
Yeah, it's meta.
Kind of fits with it. I mean, there was other people at Kenyon College too. Lewis Hyde. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I took a class with him.
Lewis Hyde is absolute legend.
Intellectual property.
And he has a new book out about grief, I think. Curious about this decision to go back and just make literature full-time study. Like, that's a pretty interesting decision.
Yeah. And how do you see that, like, intersecting with the band and what you're able to do in that direction?
Yeah, well, I don't see it as a renunciation of music or of songwriting. I just I've always taken a lot of influence from literature, and I'm also, I mean, gosh, it's been really hard touring lately. These past 3 years now has been, as Zach plays drums in the band has said, there used to be one reliable way to make money as a musician, and now there are no reliable ways. And so there's the awareness of that. That touring's just really hard, and also has always been tiring, even in the best, even in the best case. So I've been interested for a long time in maybe teaching later on in life, and I realized that if I want to actually get a PhD or an MFA, I'm 33. If I want to be teaching by the time I'm in my 40s, I've got to get something cooking.
Right. Yeah, totally.
But even if none of that ends up happening, I think just another couple of years of concerted study and reading and guidance, really, like, and some accountability with my reading too.
Right.
Like to be in a class and know that there are things that are due, and to be able to try out teaching. I think that in any of the programs that I'm looking at, it would involve probably like a freshman composition course, where I teach it. So that seems pretty exciting to me too. Yeah. Cool. So we'll see what happens, but it is going to involve at least a little bit of a break for Pinegrove. Yeah. And the band's been doing it for 11 years, and a lot of us are looking at kind of turning points in our lives, and so pressing the space bar and seeing what happens.
Cool. Do you have like a specific project or like writer or like sort of like a topic that you're thinking you'd want to do maybe like a master's thesis on?
I'm not positive yet. I definitely want to just like let my nose take me where it goes. But I am really interested in the transition between modernism and postmodernism in the post-war period, and how economic decisions and policies were inflected in the literature at the time. We look at a novel like The Waves, which is radically collectivist. It really takes a lot of time making observations about the permeability between boundaries of self, which goes quite interestingly against what type of writing the CIA was funding, which was very first person oriented. You saw in a place like the Iowa Writers Workshop. There was a lot of influence there. I'm speaking from a place of curiosity, not expertise, but this stuff that I've heard about that I want to look more into. Basically, the division of
Cool.
individualism versus collectivism and how that maybe inflected economic decisions in post-war America.
Yeah, cool. That sounds great.
That sounds a lot of like Mark McGurl's book, the Program Era. Do you know that book?
I don't.
You should look into that. He's kind of done a history of like the rise of MFA programs, because the creation of the Iowa Writers Workshop kind of coincides with post-war era, like 1948. The idea that someone could get a PhD in creative writing still kind of controversial, and I'm super interested in this. The CIA created this front called the Congress for Cultural Freedom in 1950, and that was a lot of like former communist intellectuals who got together, kind of leading this ideological struggle against Marxism in the 50s. It sounds crazy that they would have this like intellectual struggle, but it's always been a part of propaganda. I think the Paris Review was partly founded with some of this money.
Yep.
And there's a guy, a CIA agent, Michael Josselson, who was very literary, and his archives are here in Austin at the Harry Ransom Center. So maybe if you ever want to do some first person research on that stuff, I don't think honestly enough has been written about it. So it's really exciting. If anyone wants to come and do that kind of research, I think there's a lot more stories to be told. That's really exciting.
Cool.
So we've kind of said like where your head is at now. And I think part of the point of this episode is to look back on the previous year. So Dave, how do you want to segue into this? Should we just jump into the list making of list making? Should we do any caveats about your list, Evans?
Not a single one.
Okay, good.
So they don't have to be books that came out in 2022. That is very.
I have
limiting.
like 10 caveats, so that's good. You don't have any, so
good. I wanted to leave room for all of yours.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
What are your conditions, Matt?
Well,
this time
I'm not going to mention books that we already covered on the show because I feel like
same. Yeah.
It's like, my favorite albums of the year. We're talking to Pinegrove. Pinegrove is my favorite album of the year. It's like it's a given that like we did Adam Levin's book in 2022, Mount Chicago. Okay, Mount Chicago we talked about for an hour or more.
Yeah.
I don't need to talk about Mount Chicago anymore.
Yeah. I did the exact same thing.
So that's a caveat.
Or Kyle Beachy's book or Christian Chaborda's book. And Evan, did you read Kyle Beachy's book, The Most Fun Thing, skateboarding book?
That is absolutely on my radar. I haven't read it yet. I noticed
that you follow him on Instagram too. So I was like, okay, I wonder if and you have skateboarding in your background as well.
Yeah. No, I can't wait to. Yeah. You liked it?
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah. And like, even for people who are not skateboarders at all, it's great.
Like that's a hard book to categorize too. Like it's nonfiction, but I don't really limit myself to saying, I'm only going to talk about fiction or nonfiction, poetry, graphic novels, whatever. So books in general is that's my only serious other caveat. I could probably rant on Makeup more, but
yeah, cool.
A good book's a good book.
I figure for the sake of time that if we each highlight 5 books that we love this year for whatever reason, that would probably make us get to an hour easily.
Yeah. Can't wait to hear what's on yours.
Yeah.
How do you want to? I
want to start with you. I want to start with you, and you just say number 1, no particular order, or maybe they are in order. What was some of your favorite reads from 2022?
I did not rank them.
Good. All right, I didn't either. So
yeah. Okay. Well, let's see if I can limit it to 5. I might have to mention some others.
Totally. Please do.
As I am talking about one. So, firstly, I want to bring up Ernest J. Gaines. He is an American author he had a long career, between kind of like mid 60s till, the 90s or maybe early 2000s. The book I read in 2022 was A Gathering of Old Men. This came out in 1983.
Okay.
His probably his more famous work is A Lesson Before Dying. That's 93. It is bewildering to me that he's not considered one of the major American authors of the 20th century.
Oh wow, okay.
Or at all for that matter.
I'm not
I think it's
familiar with him.
possible because he's very accessible, and I think that especially Americans do value difficulty.
Sure.
I do too. You know, I like the serotonin bump when you finish a really long, tough novel is amazing.
Totally.
But for Gaines, there's just there's a moral seriousness that is not that often attached with such an accessibility. So this book, like almost all of his books, is based in Louisiana. It tends to deal with racism in the South in the immediate aftermath of Jim Crow, where things are essentially as bad as they were in Jim Crow, but just under another name. And there are tensions that are threatening to boil over.
Right.
Almost anything at all could make the whole town collapse. In this novel, there's a standoff between all of the old men from town, all the old black men from town, and the white sheriff's department. There's been a complaint, and all of them are taking responsibility for the crime that's been committed as a way to protect each other. And what ends up happening is each of these men has a soliloquy, almost a short story about what has brought him to the breaking point, what's culturally and politically brought him to the conclusion that he just can't take this treatment anymore. And so it's a really interesting formal conceit. And stylistically, I mean, I mentioned the moral gravity, but I think that only gets at part of what he's doing, because it's also really funny, really understated, and really hypnotic. Like I might even compare him a little bit to Murakami in that way, really immersive and rhythmic and accessible. So that's the first book I want to recommend. It's possible that A Lesson Before Dying is a better entry point, but either of these would be totally great. And he's one of my favorite authors. I think this was the fourth novel of his that I've read.
I really liked A Lesson Before Dying. I mean, do you think it kind of got a
Yeah.
bad reputation maybe in the mid 90s because it was an Oprah book? And I remember like someone gave it to me and I was like, oh, this is an Oprah book. And then I read it and I was absolutely blown away. And like, I know a lot of other teachers who love that book and teach it instead of To Kill a Mockingbird. And like, I would love to see it replace To Kill a Mockingbird on a lot of syllabi. I'm also a big stamp collector, and so they're just announced a couple weeks ago they're going to do an Ernest Gaines stamp, and I think that it comes out
Wow, right.
in next week or the week before. Like, I don't have it yet; it's not out yet, but there's going to be an Ernest. He died in 2019, I believe, so he's just now eligible really to be on a stamp, and
Oh, cool.
pretty exciting. So good timing with the any philatelists listening.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
You want to be pen pals, Matt?
I have a bunch. I would love to send you some mail art or stamps and mail, and I'll follow up with you on that later. But for real, I'll send you some Ernest Gaines stamps.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there are a lot of good books that end up being on the Oprah's book club, right? As much as we chagrin that sometimes, like The Road by Cormac McCarthy was one, so you can't always balk at it.
Yeah, right. And who could forget when the Franzen controversy, when he said it out loud, like, "Hey, I'm not sure I want this."
Dumbass.
Franzen.
People aren't going to take my book seriously.
Started,
but he definitely has a history of putting his foot in his mouth. We talked about Wallace's commencement speech at Kenyon, but my graduation commencement was Franzen.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Whoa, how'd that sit with you? How's that?
I liked his speech, I have to say. Yeah. Although I felt annoyed when the speech was verbatim published in the New York Times like the next day or 2 days ago, 2 days later, without any reference to Kenyon College at all. So that bothered me, but I liked the speech.
Big up to Kenyon College again. We can't stop talking about Kenyon.
Yeah, well, that might be an all right transition to another book on my list, which is Morality Play by Barry Unsworth. This came out in 1995, and I learned about him because as I was getting my applications for grad school together, I was in touch with one of my former professors, Deborah Laycock, and she suggested this book. Barry Unsworth taught at Kenyon for just a few years in the 90s, I think. I hadn't heard of him. He's British, but lived in Italy for a lot of his life. I just loved this so much. In fact, I read 2 books by him this past year. Also, Sacred Hunger, which won the '92 Booker Prize. But it's Morality Play I think I want to talk about. Both of these were historical. They are historical fiction, which is absolutely not something I generally gravitate towards. But I think he probably was also annoyed that he was kind of pigeonholed. That I have been reading up on him a little bit, and he repeatedly requested in interviews that his fiction just be taken on its own merit. It doesn't matter that it happens to be set in the medieval England, or Sacred Hunger is an exploration of the transatlantic slave trade in the 1700s. Everything about this book is so immersive and self-aware, and manages to ask the big questions while maintaining this really sly balance. Well, I'll say a little more and it'll make sense. So there's a group of this like medieval.
Can I read the description of it? It says the book is set in medieval England sometime near the 14th century, and the events described in the book take place in an unnamed village in the north of England. A priest fleeing from his diocese joins a group of traveling players. The players are traveling toward their liege lord's castle, where they are expected to play at Christmas, but short of money, they decide to stage their plays at a village en route. This is really interesting already.
Yeah.
Sounds like Station 11 a little bit, but like pre-apocalypse.
Pre almost everything.
14th century.
Yeah. Which apocalypse? Depends.
So like the most interesting moments here are when it's kind of unclear whether these actors are acting or whether they are being themselves. Like, you know, their rehearsals staged, where, you know, somebody's like wearing a Lucifer mask, and then in between takes they're still wearing the mask, but they're saying whatever's on their mind. And the majorly interesting part for me was when they start to abandon the prescribed canon that these players are allowed to draw from, like, you know, biblical stories and stuff like that, and they decide they want to make a play about real life, quote unquote. There's been a death in the town where they are, and they kind of use the format of a play to investigate the death, to talk about the nature of death, and it is considered really awesome by the populace and really blasphemous by the ruling class. And so it ends up being a really excellent critique of the structure of medieval society, but then also of our own society in all the ways we've retained power structures similarly based on exploitation and on avarice. So it really works on a lot of levels and was a really smart book, a wonderful book.
Cool.
Morality play.
That sounds awesome.
Definitely sounds like something that'd be popular in grad school. There's a lot of meat on the bone. You know, like
sounds like it.
You can really dig it
for a while. Yeah, nice. Matt, how about you? What are a couple of yours that you want to highlight from the year in reading?
let's keep going with Evan's list.
Okay,
I'm
we'll do
into this. Let's keep
555.
going
All
with
right,
Evan's
sounds
list.
good.
All right, cool. So let's see. I've done. Oh yeah. Okay. Breakfast of Champions. Kurt Vonnegut.
Yes, that's a great one.
So this is his first book after Slaughterhouse 5, and that was the one that really brought him into renowned. And then Breakfast of Champions was the first book that he wrote where he understood that he had an international audience. So I think that's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
And we see with Breakfast of Champions a novel that's, I think, really trying hard to do something good in the world. Like, it's kind of aware of its own platform, and he's clearly trying. He's talking about marginalized groups explicitly in the 70s. It's also showing us that the 70s were a vastly different time. We would probably not tolerate this many instances of the N-word from a white author in 2022, 23.
It's been a while since I read this book. Like, are there quite a lot?
Yeah. And
Like in
he
the teens or 20s? Okay.
It's in an effort to talk about racism and other bigotry in the U.S. at the time. But, it didn't really age perfectly. But I think the effort still has to be commended. I'm just, I'm really relating to the image of him in his workshop. This novel took him 4 years to write. He thought it sucked for most of it, and it was clear that this weight of responsibility of platform was really weighing on him. And what came out was a book that earnestly tries to talk about prejudice and bigotry in the United States in the 70s. He even talks about capitalism and connects the two. So in a lot of ways, this was a really advanced work for its time, but it kind of had an audience that was probably, he knew a lot of high school students and young people were reading his work. And I love that the first thing he tried to do when he knew he had an audience was talk about bigotry in the United States.
Right, yeah. Did you hear the Tim Heidecker song that came out this year about Kurt Vonnegut?
No, I'd love to.
Kurt Weill supports on the song.
Oh, good.
It's wonderful, and he talks about Kurt Vonnegut coming to his town, to the university, to speak, and it is like a song to definitely check out. I have it on my year-end playlist.
All
it's
right,
great.
I'm writing this down.
Yeah. Which, like, weirdly, Tim Heidecker can write like a serious, reflective album about his years in high school.
Yeah.
And then also be like one of the funniest humans on the planet.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think Vonnegut with this book is actually more successful in talking about race than like another book that I love, which is related to it in a way, is John Updike's Rabbit Redux, which came out a little bit before that, I think 1968, and this is 1972, 73. And, all of those, white men writing about race in the Vietnam era, post-Vietnam era, it sounds really clunky and antiquated, but like, I think to me, when I think back on these guys writing about it, it shows like in some ways how far we've come and also how not far we've come. Like today reading about, the Supreme Court rolling back affirmative action stuff, and there are still people who are white men older than us who would be happy to roll back things as far as they could into the 1950s. So I think the fact that he was so politically engaged, I mean, obviously the Slaughterhouse-Five is a political novel, geopolitical in a lot of ways, but it shows like political is personal, and this is a much more personal book. Breakfast of Champions is very smaller scale compared to Slaughterhouse-Five, but I think the fact that he still has a pretty big following, like I went to the Vonnegut Museum in Indianapolis in 2021 for the first time, which is Like they make a big deal of Indianapolis. They go
That sounds fun.
go see Vonnegut. Like it's in the airport and shut like big
Oh,
signs
cool.
like Vonnegut.
Oh yeah.
So the fact that
Okay.
he's still like he's not forgotten, and I think widely read, is
Mhm.
hopefully is taken as still as a serious writer. So
Yeah, it's been a while too. The thing that sticks out like in my mind the most about that book, that I remember the most about it, is just like how he always mentions the penis size of every male character in the book.
yes,
That like when you're talking about all this like race critical race theory stuff, I'm like, I don't remember any of that. I just remember him like referring to every guy's
Right.
and then like
he
Kilgore
measures
Trout.
his own
You're right.
with like hilariously diminutive dimensions.
That's great.
He wasn't afraid to laugh at himself.
Yeah. No
And this
kidding.
is a book where there's a lot of visual components. Like he's
Mhm.
illustrated
Yeah.
a lot throughout the book, which is so fun. It's such a characteristic voice,
Mhm.
or a singular voice.
Yeah.
So, gotta love
He just
Vonnegut.
like seems like Mark Twain. Like they seem like they're so kindred with like the way that they satirize.
it's so visual, but it made for a terrible movie. I don't know if you know
Oh,
they
I
made
never
it like
saw that.
No,
I never
Bruce
watched it.
didn't try that out.
Don't waste your time. I mean, it's like Bruce
Okay.
Willis and Albert Finney. It was just a total bomb. I mean, it's like a famous thing of like writers who are like, I don't care how the movie is, just pay me, But
Right.
also, like, do you really want a box office bomb on your like associated with one of your best books? I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Number 3.
That's number 3.
Yeah. So I think I have one more maybe. Although there are plenty more that I really had a hard time narrowing it down to 5. But
how many books do you think you read this year, Evan? Do you count every year?
I do count. I think it was in the 50s, like
nice.
roughly one
per
book
week.
a week.
Wow.
Yeah, that's good. I was like low 20s this year.
Well, we all fit in what we can.
I was in the 30s, but a couple of them I wouldn't really count because they were really easy. So
I did reread The Instructions by Adam Levin this year, so that took 4 months out of my reading.
Yeah, that's a long book.
That counts as
yeah,
like
that
4.
decelerated my. Yeah, okay. Thanks, guys.
All right, give us another one, Evan. This is good.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Public Library by Ali Smith.
Okay. I've never read any Ali Smith. I have one of her books at home. It's been on the shelf for a long time, but I think I need to dig into some of this
She
stuff.
is so great. She is one of my absolute favorite living writers.
Okay.
Or just
awesome.
writers in general. I think this might have been my 8th book that I've read by her, which I think is a testament to just like, I can't get enough. And she's written a lot too. That's maybe half of her total output, and she's still making them. But this one is the first short story collection I've read by her. Public Library. So there are all these like they're classic short stories, or just like what you think of when you think of a short story, and then there are these interstitial pieces in between that are talking mostly in other people's voices. Like she I guess invited writer friends and other serious readers in her life to comment on why public libraries are cool and important. This was right around when the Tory government, which is to say the Conservative Party in the UK, were slashing budgets for libraries. This came out in 2015. I thought it was really cool that she used whatever opportunity she had to include these testimonials about why libraries are good. And it also explained within the text, like kind of what the political strategy was there from the Tories, switching them from publicly funded to community funded, quote unquote, which really meant volunteer and donation based funding, which of course is in line with the conservative agenda everywhere. They don't believe in public services or helping anyone in particular, besides themselves and their rich friends, of course. So we have that context, and the stories themselves are pretty representative, I think, of what Ali Smith does well, which are these are stories about about language, about words, about they engage with authors that she likes and she's thinking about. Like there's this whole story that is nominally about her trying to fight a false credit charge on one of her cards, but really turns out to be her thinking about D.H. Lawrence while she's like pissed off on hold.
Cool.
And that's fairly indicative of what she does. So like really for anybody that loves reading fiction about words, about etymology, about authors, then this is definitely for you.
Oh, nice. What's the title of that one again?
Yeah, Public Library. Yeah.
And so it's a story, and then it's followed by like a reflection from a different person. Is that what you said?
Well, no, I mean they're not really related as such, but they're all kind of thematically like loosely connected, just as a celebration of writing and reading.
Okay.
Yeah.
But she recruited like other people to write reflections.
She apparently interviewed people and included their responses about like why public libraries were meaningful to them. Yeah, why it's an important institution, what services they provide. Yeah,
nice.
So it was pretty cool.
Cool.
And basically it was just like a lot of writers that that we'd recognize the names of that say this was crucial to my development as a writer, and it's kind of making the case that if we want to keep having good art, then we have to value it from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. There's this quote that you see often that's like, the library is the last place where you can sort of be in a public building and not with the expectation of buying anything.
Yes, that's right.
It's sort of like, a place to hang out, and it's not Starbucks, it's not Barnes and Noble, it's a public entity, and that's we have very few of those in the U.S. We don't have very many other institutions, so I definitely think it's important.
Evan, was that 4? I think.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I think that probably for you two and any listeners that haven't checked her out, Autumn, her novel Autumn, is probably a really good place to start. She wrote 4 books named for the seasons that were published within a year of each other.
Right. Yeah.
So this was kind of her attempt to make a hyper contemporary statement. She said in interviews that I've read that she's like, well, I don't know if this is good literature, but it sure is current. And it's that, but it's also great. It really is great. It's unbelievable that she wrote all of these so fast. And Summer, which came out in 2020, the summer of 2020, mentions George Floyd. It mentions the coronavirus. They're not like major elements of the novel, but like when I was reading that book in August of 2020 and saw George Floyd's name in print in a novel, it was surprisingly emotional to see that. So I think that if only for that, the project was really worthwhile, but it's not only for that. These are fantastically inventive and playful, funny, strange, all the good stuff. I think that you can maybe make a connection to George Saunders in the tone sometimes, but she's a little bit more exists in the real world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Saunders is a bit in the stratosphere with most of the kind of like sci-fi elements of his stuff.
Yeah. But kind of that friendly, playful tone.
Yeah. Do you have to read the books in sequence that they came out? Is that helpful, or can they just stand alone?
They can stand alone, but cross references start to accumulate especially by the
Mhm.
last one. So there's
Yeah,
something fun if you read them in sequence, but they're all great.
nice.
And if you just like happen to see Spring on your friend's bookshelf and want to borrow it, there's no harm in that.
Noted. Noted.
Awesome. Yeah.
Give
Yeah.
us another one.
Cool.
This is
So
good.
I think I said I
Yeah.
I will if you want. I think that was
That was 4.
Oh,
I
was
think,
it?
right?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, let's do 5.
Great. Okay, I'm between 2. Maybe if there's one that you might prefer here.
Do 2. Do 2.
All right, fine.
Top 6.
Top 6. Joy Williams, Breaking and Entering. People have been recommending me Joy Williams for a long time, and especially because of my love of John Williams, like the proximity of that for some reason was just like, all right,
Are they
well, I got to
related
read
in any
Joy,
way?
clearly.
Are they cousins or spouses or anything like that?
I would like to know. So aesthetically, for me, this was just exactly what I like in a novel. It's strange. It was funny. It was dealing a lot with mediation. You know, it was kind of like formally self-aware, and used those types of treatments to talk about how strange it is to be alive. It is a book that for me was genuinely esoteric, is really at the edge of mystery, of knowing, of language, of life. And all of this is against a kind of incongruous backdrop of an extremely alcoholic Florida tropic. This is like southern Florida. The plants are exploding out from every corner. Everybody's constantly drunk. And the main character is a young woman who's just kind of trying to figure out what this shit is all about.
Mhm.
It turns out that she has a near death experience earlier in her life. We learn through a flashback, and that kind of contextualizes her present tense position, where she's living on borrowed time and doesn't really know what to do with it. And that was something I really related to. I mean, not that I've been close to death in any literal sense, but just knowing. There was just a moment of recognition, I think, between me and this character, that when it's sort of rare when you find something like that, and it's unignorable when you do. And so I'm not sure that this novel is necessarily for everybody, but
Mhm.
for me, I think it may have been the best novel that I read this year. It's terrifyingly, depressingly good. Everything that people have been saying about Joy Williams, based on this one novel alone, is absolutely true.
Okay. I don't know anything about her. Where's she from? Is she from Florida?
I think she's from Florida.
Okay.
She wrote a guidebook to the Florida Keys.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's true too.
She's
Like for
very
tourists?
affiliated with the Iowa Writers Workshop. I mean,
Oh, okay.
she's a
Yeah.
big part of literary culture. I think she was married to the fiction editor of Esquire for many years, and
Oh, okay.
had a lot of famous friends because she went to Iowa with Raymond Carver and Vance Borjali, who was one of David Foster Wallace's teachers, to bring it back to, everything I talk about. But she just came up in my world the other day because she wrote a review of one of my favorite books, which is Jim Gower's novel Explosives. And at the bottom of the review, it says she saw like an ad for novel Explosives in the New York Review of Books with a blurb from Michael Silverblatt. And she was like, what the hell is this book? And she bought it on a whim and then reviewed it for this Substack called Book Post. And I was like, Joy Williams is writing book reviews? This is crazy.
Yeah.
That's right.
But, wow. Okay. Yeah. So writing that one down too. So this is one of those vintage contemporaries, which I have been really into this year, and it's such a nostalgic thing that these books, which a lot of them I think came out just straight to paperback and were intended for a younger audience, in a bygone era where there were a lot of people in their 20s and 30s who were really spending a lot of their free time reading. And now I think it's a little bit more of a unusual, or in some ways radical, act to spend your time that way. Then these were marketed as fun things, this is like the era of, as Wallace put it, the conspicuously young writer, Bret Easton Ellis, Jay McInerney, Richard Ford, Ann Beattie. Frederick Exley has one there, of Fans Notes, Jane Ann Phillips, etc. So I guess I was reading this book also with an interest in that, and an interest in what those authors were up to, which I guess is sometimes called minimalism or Kmart realism, kind of like a response, at least as I see it, to the encyclopedia novel, the really tough, thick, abstruse approach in the 70s. And here we have in the 80s a new generation of writer who does want to critique materialism, but does so from a more detached, kind of nihilistic standpoint, sort of a fuck it, like, this is who I am, this is my generation, really kind of trying to stake out a new voice. So that's fascinating, at very least as a reaction to Pynchon, Gaddis, DeLillo. But I think its descendants are alt-lit, Tao Lin maybe, or like
Blake Butler.
Blake. Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you see a lineage there, so that's kind of fascinating to me too.
Cool. That's Breaking and Entering.
1988. Cool.
Cool.
Well, and then I guess the last one, it kind of follows well from that, which is Tao Lin's novel Leave Society. I was really fascinated to read this, having read his earlier works and not always liked it. He, in his earlier books, is drug obsessed, totally egocentric, very nihilistic, very bleak, quite like someone like Bret Easton Ellis, who is a writer that I've also read and not liked. Although there is something stylistically engaging about all of these books. But in Leave Society, we have a book by somebody who is really trying to heal from toxic masculinity, toxic culture in general, and pharmacological toxicity, with a really self-aware, fastidious, obsessive, even journaling practice. Like, basically it seems that he's constructed this novel from really, really meticulous journalings that include over the course of maybe 4 years, that include dosages of drugs to the milligram, the time of day, these sorts of things. It shows him noticing patterns in this self-reported history, and just the way this book was constructed, and with the departure from the earlier nihilism, as I mentioned, made it, I mean, it was great to see the character arc in the novel itself, but also from a meta vantage, it was really beautiful and really was inspiring for me to take even greater accountability in my own life. And it's not often that a novel will actually change your life in a meaningful way. And I don't mean to overstate it. Our lives are changing all the time, but this made me think more about what I'm putting into my body, the things that make my body feel good, and that being kind to your own body and doing things that make your body feel good in like a real holistic sense is also an act of community love, because you're better poised to be supportive of the people that are counting on you when you are not curled up in a hungover ball.
I mean, he's definitely a strange character. I'll say this, and that he put out
Yes.
a pretty controversial like Twitter thread about curing himself of autism, and there was a lot of people like pushing back on that. And like, I read like you, I read some of his earlier books, like Shoplifting from American Apparel, and a book called E. And what I liked about those books is like it felt very new and fresh and like avant-garde. And I think you can only do that for so long before you're like no longer new, right? And avant-garde and pushing the boundaries of stuff. So I don't know. It's interesting. He's an interesting case. He's interested me a little bit less. So it's interesting to hear people who have read him in a different way than like, I guess I'm a little closed-minded if I, to him, like honestly, like it's a tougher sell than like going back and reading Joy Williams' book for me,
Right.
because I've given him a fair shot, and like I feel like it's his earlier stuff just wasn't that deep, and it sounds like he's maybe gotten a little more serious,
reflective.
I mean, I definitely want to emphasize that the best part about this book was having read his earlier stuff and seeing such a maturation from that point. Cool. And making the case that people can and do change.
People can
but
change.
I'm aware of the controversies around him, and I also felt skeptical picking this book up. I'm not even sure why I did, but I'm happy that I did.
Yeah. Huh. Cool.
Leaf Society. Honestly, it wasn't even on my radar. I think the last one of his that I picked up was Taipei. But
same.
Interesting.
I've never read anything by Tao Lin. I think because of this kind of sort of cultural thing among my friends that have held his work a bit in like at bay or in derision a little bit or something. So I've just always like been like, I just won't check that out, I guess. But it's nice to hear like a heartening new direction or.
Yeah, totally. And, to be absolutely clear, like there are a number of books that we can choose from. There's no reason necessarily that either of you or the listeners of this podcast should definitely choose this one. But, just from my year of reading, it really did stand out. I have to admit.
Nice. Cool.
Well, that's definitely interesting to hear. And like I say, I'm not saying, I'm saying this is like a flaw in me, not in you or in Tao Lin. Like it's a flaw in me that I'm like closed-minded to him in some ways. And I mean,
he has flaws, and so do I, and so do we all.
Yeah, I accept that. And like I say, I want to make it clear, like it's not something me judging you or him, it's me judging myself. So
sure.
You've brought Matt to a point of introspection, Evan, and we appreciate that on this show.
Yeah, and also like I don't know like how much like do I want to read a book that changes my life in that way right now? I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, we like our habits, no?
Sure, yeah.
We're very comfortable.
Yeah. Evan, thank you for your great list. That's awesome. I've only read one of those books, so I have some great homework to do, and I love that.
I can't wait to hear yours.
Yeah, awesome.
Dave,
Matt, do you want to go next?
Let's alternate ours, Dave. Let's do like
sure. Sounds good.
Let's do one and one, and then we'll go back and forth.
Great. All right. What's one of your top fives you want to highlight?
Yeah, number one on my list is a book that I probably spent the most time with in 2022, not because it's really long or tricky or complex. I just was in a really slow period where I read the book really slowly. And it's a book called Robert Cruise, written by Thomas Berger. And I bought this book, came out in 1995, I think, 1991. And I bought the book at a library book sale because I was like, one, I never heard of it. I like Thomas Berger because he wrote Little Big Man. And I thought maybe this is related to Harry Crews. Like, I'm a big Harry Crews fan. And partly when you were talking about Joy Williams in Florida, it makes me think of Harry Crews, who taught at University of Florida for a long time and was kind of always an alcoholic, drunk, falling over himself, but a big part of literary culture there. But this has nothing to do with Harry Crews, really. Although I have a suspicion the book was based on him. I couldn't find, because the book came out in like the early 90s, I couldn't find anything online that's like, oh, this is a thinly veiled book about Harry Crews. What it is like a thinly veiled retelling of the Robinson Crusoe story. So Robert Cruise, it's like, really, it's Robinson Crusoe. And the book is very similar to the book Hatchet, if you've ever read as a kid. Gary Paulson.
Oh, yeah, like the YA novel. Yeah.
The plane crashes in the forest. One person survives. In Hatchet, it's a kid. In Robert Cruise, it's a drunken former writer named Robert Cruise. And it's like a survivalist book. He has to survive in the wilderness alone and find his way home. And that is... I don't know. It's almost like reality TV. Like, you ever watch those reality TV shows, like Alive, where it's like someone's alone in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. It's really fascinating. What are they going to eat? What are they going to, life is reduced to its bare essentials. So again, I think Thomas Berger is a great writer. I don't know that this is I'm not putting it up there with Moby Dick or anything. I spent a lot of time with the book because I read it slowly. I thought about it a lot, and I had never heard anyone else read the book or talk about it. And, I've been around books a long time. So I'm always looking for stuff that just I know to talk about. And I don't know why that appeals to me, but if I did see at least one of our
carving
friends,
out your niche, Matt.
I did see at least one of our friends, Dennis Frank, had picked up the book on Twitter, probably based on my recommendation. So if anyone else wants to read this book and talk about it, I would be down. But it was just, like I say, a book that I spent a lot of time with, and I really liked the main character. I was rooting for him to get out of the wilderness. Sort of a companion book with that is a Rebecca Solnit book called Field Guide to Getting Lost, about how freaking hard it is actually to get lost in this day and age. And the people who do get lost, it's sort of like losing sense of time and consciousness rather than losing your coordinates. But this sort of fictional conceit of crashing a plane in the middle of nowhere, how many times have you flown over somewhere and you just look down, it's just forest, or it's just as far as you can see, no people. And that sort of allows a fiction writer to drop in a person who's not paying attention to where they're flying, somewhere in the wilderness. And it's really hard to get out of. It'd be one thing if you crashed, near a road or a body of water or something. But anyways, that's probably my number one.
Cool. Sounds fun. It kind of reminds me, they're getting a little bit off topic here, but I just watched Triangle of Sadness a couple nights ago. Has anyone seen that movie?
Never heard of it.
No.
Okay. It's from the same director who did Force Majeure, which was I think movie was 5 years ago.
Never heard of it.
Okay. It's about people on a very rich people on a cruise ship, and things kind of go awry. Woody Harrelson is the most famous actor in it. It's great. I really liked it. It's a major takedown of luxury culture, and there's a lot of fun interplay between Marxism and capitalism between some of the characters.
So that's your number one?
Yes, that film is my number one book that I read this year. One of the books I would want to highlight this year is a book called Transcendent Kingdom by Gyaasi. Has anyone read Gyaasi before? She's a Ghanaian American writer.
I say Gyaasi. I didn't know it was Jesse, but I've seen the name.
Yeah, it's pronounced Jessie. She was on Bookworm actually to talk about this book with Michael Silverblatt, and she has a previous book called what is it called? Homeland, Homecoming, I think it's called. But this book, Rachel, my wife, put me on this book. She like pretty much has a policy now that she just doesn't read books by white male authors, or if she does, it's like maybe like 2 a year or something like that. So she like reads a lot of like diverse people of color women writers, and this is a book that she really recommended to me, so I was like, great. It's about a 28-year-old PhD candidate at Stanford who's doing her research in neuroscience. She's working on like lab mice, and there's a lot of stuff in this book about the immigrant experience coming from Ghana, living in I think it's Alabama that they live in. So like that's a major differently cultural context from coming from Ghana, right? Like coming to that state in the US. There's a lot of stuff about like addiction and depression and familial loss in this book. Those themes seem to be in a lot of books that we tend to like, Matt, and talk about on this show. So she's really like working on these lab mice to try and like figure out cures for her loved ones, sort of like people who have close proximity to her. And then meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of kind of themes about her growing up in like a very like conservative Christian evangelical context, and then her being a scientist and working through big questions of science and biology and theology and how all those things relate to each other or intersect, or in some cases crash. And so there's a lot of stuff about science and religion in this book that's really compelling. And I like this book a lot. It was like a nice kind of detour from some of the more like, I don't know, postmodern self-aware stuff that I usually read. But I would really recommend Transcendent Kingdom by Gyaasi.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
What you're saying, Dave, about like Rachel only reading non men, we definitely sweat this about like the guests that we have on the show, and like even we try to have a mix of men and women, and we're not always successful at it, and we admit whenever we don't have a good mix of it, and there's definitely like some people who are out on that whole thing, which is fine. I want to just looking back at my list, I do realize like I have a pretty good mix of men and women on here. Like of the 30-ish books that I've read, good mix of international writers versus people writing in English.
Mm-hmm.
But I am like, my personal reading is like, I want another caveat. This is number 3. It's purely for pleasure. Like I read for pleasure. Like I'm not in grad school. I'm not doing this for work.
Right.
I'm not doing this out of like gun to my head obligation. I'm doing this because like I find deep personal pleasure in reading, and I sort of let my nose take me wherever it goes. I see a lot of people posting online like, these are the books I'm going to read in 2023. It's like some long spreadsheet of lists, like you're going to read these books, and like I just don't operate that way. Like I operate much more out of serendipity and like whatever I'm in the mood for, independent and stuff that like maybe I reread something I wasn't planning on it. Maybe something new comes out. Maybe I discover a book at bookshop. So that's another caveat. Like I'm very online, but I try not to follow a lot of the crowds and the trends of everyone got this new book and they're all reading it. I really try not to give a shit about that. And I do get suckered into it sometimes to buy a book. But I mean, Evan, do you deal with any of this like fear of missing out or anything like that?
Well, the question of how we choose what next to read is really, really interesting, I think. Like, do you want to continue the conversation that you're having, read a contemporary of them, or, do you need to totally mix it up? And I agree with you, Matt. You want to just follow your nose, because curiosity is hard to come by, and when you actually have genuine interest in following up on something, you just got to listen to that. So sometimes I'll be stuck in translated novels from Japan for like 4 books in a row, and then at a certain point you just know that you got to take a flight to somewhere else,
right?
So Yeah,
And you were
yeah,
like
I
totally
do.
nervous to go there in the first place.
Yeah,
anyways,
right. Totally. That's right. But
You've overcome that now.
I am intentional about reading diversely, and that means diverse authorship, and that also means topically diverse, uh, diverse publication dates.
Mhm.
Not only stuff in the 20th century or 21st century.
Yeah.
And although I have to draw the line at, if it's just like a straight up nonfiction, like I if it's not a book with supposedly literary merit, then it's hard to get to the next
To dig
page
it.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also don't read a lot of poetry, but I guess that's something that I want to dig into also. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's so, I mean, the questions around reading diversely, I think, can be interpreted in a variety of ways.
I do have a poetry recommendation on my list from last year.
Okay.
But my number 2 is a work of nonfiction. I do, like I say, happily read something without a lot of literary merit. But this book is a book of nonfiction with some literary merit, which is a biography of one of my favorite writers, Evan S. Connell. And the biography
Okay.
came out last year. It's called Literary Alchemist by Steve Paul, who was a journalist from Kansas City. And I was just shocked to see that someone had written a biography of Evan S. Connell. Um, eh, he is a very eclectic writer. Like in his career, he jumped around from topic to topic almost intentionally weirdly. His probably most famous book is the Mrs. Bridge, Mr. Bridge, and Mrs. Bridge, which they're fantastic books if you've not read those. Um, very fragmented style, highly literary, sort of domestic novels, Mrs. Bridge being the better one of the two. But he also wrote 2 books which I really love, which are super fragmented, called Notes from a Bottle Found at the Beach at Carmel, and the other one called Points of a Four Compass Rose, which are really almost like David Markson, little fragments full of literary
Oh, yeah.
allusions and Latin and
Cool.
prayers, and but they have a maybe more coherent structure in some ways than Markson's books. Anyways, biography of Evan S. Connell, I was riveted by because I knew almost nothing. He was a very private person. I knew almost nothing about his actual life. Evan S. Connell, biography by Steve Paul, is just, if you have any interest in Evan Connell. He also wrote Son of the Morning Star about General George Custer, which was turned into a big movie series and the TV series
Oh,
in the
okay.
early 90s. But again, I really love his book, Notes from a Bottle Found on the Beach at Carmel. And then to read a biography of the guy. I mean, I hope someday someone does a biography of David Markson. I'd love to see
Yeah,
that.
that'd be cool.
I'd read that.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's my
Interesting cat.
number 2.
Nice. For number 2 for me, a book called Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. She is married to Hari Kunsru, Matt, which you recommended Red Pill a couple of years ago on this episode. Right. And I read that and I really liked it. So it's her 4th novel, came out in 2021. It's about a woman who leaves New York and goes to The Hague in the Netherlands to work as a translator at the International Criminal Court. And she's assigned to a case against like a horrific West African leader who's being charged with war crimes. And she's interpreting this like very long, months-long trial. And the book is it's really just got this like lovely flow to it. It's like very pleasant to read. The protagonist, I don't think she ever really gets named in the book, so you don't have a sense of like really close personal attachment to the protagonist, but there's something kind of like curious and intriguing about it. And then there's stuff about like her family back home. Her father has recently died. She starts a relationship in Netherlands. She doesn't really know anybody. And there's some like really riveting scenes where she's like face to face with this dictator in the same like small room, and she has the job of translating. And it's also a book that Rachel recommended to me, and I found it to be really quite powerful. And I mean, like, quietly devastating is a word or a phrase that sometimes gets ascribed to books, and I think that this is one that does that really nicely. Yeah, Intimacies, Katie Kitamura.
Thanks, Dave.
How about number 3, Matt?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Number 3 for me is a book called "We Keep the Dead Close" by Becky Cooper. And Becky, who I was aware of back on the days of the DT Max book coming out, she also, like me, did some research for DT Max on the life of David Foster Wallace. And when she was an undergrad at Harvard, she wrote her thesis on Wallace, kind of like a biography of Wallace herself that she wrote. So when I saw she had a book coming out, nonfiction book, I was fascinated by it and I bought it. And it's big. It's like 600-700 pages. And it's a very much first person tale of her hearing a rumor at Harvard that a professor in the 60s, anthropology professor, had murdered his student. And this was like unspoken, like no one talked about it. And maybe he got away with it and maybe he's still there. And so she has this opportunity to go and like, should I confront him? He's still here. And this is sort of in the Me Too era, but it's not just that he maybe had an affair with her. It's like killed her. And the case is fascinating. And, you know, it's a true crime book in that she's going to be like, I'm going to find, if he didn't do it, maybe he did, whoever it is, I want to try to solve this murder. And again, she doesn't know these people. The woman's parents are still alive, or family members are still alive, brother. And, you know, it's sort of a tale of her following this thread that she just can't stop thinking about this case. The woman's name, the murdered woman's name is Jane Britton. And like when her body was discovered, there was some like red ochre powder found on the body, which they think they could only find at a certain anthropology lab. And maybe there was some weird burial ritual done over her that was related to this tribe that they were studying. So she gets very into like the anthropology of like what they were studying at this dig site in what is now Iran. And it's just a really well done book. I found it very satisfying. Could not put it down. We Keep the Dead Close by Jane. It's about Jane Britton by Becky Cooper. And it's one of those books I think too came out like right at the beginning of the pandemic and really didn't get much publicity because it came out at a bad time. But
sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's really good.
Wild.
Becky Cooper.
Cool. And it's huge.
Yeah, it's like 700 pages, I think. It's pretty big. You know.
Yeah, okay. Deep dive. Cool. I guess number 3 for me, this probably doesn't need a lot more commentary, is I read The Overstory by Richard Powers this year. And Deb, when we had Deb Olin Unforth on, was around this time last year, I think, she kind of like galvanized me to read it. I wouldn't say like humiliated me, but she was definitely very like, oh, Dave, you have to read this book. It's I'm just kidding, Deb. Yeah, so I was like, all right, now's the time. Picked it up. Absolutely loved it. This book is gorgeous. It is like the prose is just crackles off the page. It makes you think about your place in nature in ways that other books have never done. Trees are like beyond fascinating now, and I really noticed them a lot more as a result of this book. And yeah, I think it lives up to all of its accolades that it received, including the Pulitzer.
Did you have a favorite section of it, Dave?
I really like the opening. Like the first 50 pages was really compelling about the like, you know, chestnut. Immigrants to America in like the 1600s and the American chestnut tree, and then the like blight that happened upon it, and then the way that just sets the stage for the rest of the lineage in the book and the families and characters. I thought it was a great kind of like open. Yeah, I like that sequence a lot. Anyone else got a chance to get to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I love that book.
Not yet.
Yeah.
I've been curious about Richard Powers for a long time. Actually,
Yeah.
you know what introduced me to the name Richard Powers was Every Love Story is a Ghost Story by
Mhm.
D.T. Max,
Yeah.
which an invaluable book for introducing titles. Like, you know, I thought one of the great
Yeah.
things about the biography was how closely, how seriously it took Wallace's reading habits,
Yeah.
and you know, really made that accessible for the
Mhm.
reader.
There's a really great conversation between Wallace and Powers that's online. I can't remember. We'll link to it in the show notes, but I listened to it after I finished the Overstory. It's like a 30-minute conversation on a stage with a moderator where they're just talking about writing, and it's a lovely conversation, and they're both like very endeared to each other. You can tell like they both really respect each other.
Well, wasn't there some sort of conspiracy theory that maybe David Foster Wallace was Richard Powers' like secret pen name,
Oh, I've never heard this before.
or one way or the other?
I think this was more related to Evan
Do you know
Darrow.
what I'm talking about, Matt?
Yeah, I think this is more related to Evan Darrow.
That makes sense.
Richard Powers was Evan Darrow. But in that interview that you're talking about, Dave, that was a conspiracy theory for a while amongst the early 2000s Wallace fandom that I loved. Was in that interview, there's a version of it online that starts with just Wallace talking and you don't get to hear Powers. And Wallace says something at the beginning of that interview, like before he reads, he says, "Oh, well, I have a brick in my back pocket, but I'm going to read from this other thing." And people are like, "Holy shit, does that mean he's written another like 1,000-page novel and he's keeping it in his back pocket?" But when you listen to the full thing, Powers is actually talking about Charles Dickens, and in Dickens there's a character who goes around selling houses by keeping a brick in his back pocket, and he will sell you the whole house by saying it's made out of this kind of a brick. And Powers is using that as a metaphor for how writers go around selling a novel by just reading a little portion of it at these readings. And so Wallace is picking up saying like, well, I have a brick in my back pocket, but I'm going to read from this other thing that's not from a novel. But when we first heard that, we were just like, holy shit, he has a brick in his back pocket.
That's amazing.
I mean, I have a long relationship as a reader with Richard Powers, and I think his friends call him Rick Powers. I read him first in 1996, a book called Galatea 2.2, which I fell in love with.
That's one of your very favorites.
It's one of my very favorite books. And I mean, immediately read everything he had written, which was only 3 other books at that point. Now he's written about a dozen more, and I've read them, I think, all. I think there is... it's a long story, but I got to meet his editor once, who was Elizabeth Sifton when she was at FSG, and he had just written a book called Gain, which is about soap. It's a very weird book. We had, tried to get him to.
I ended up listening to quite a few like interviews and stuff of his after I finished the Overstory, and he's so compelling to listen to. Like he's a
really good speaker. Man. And he lectured at Stanford for a while. I think he lives in like rural Tennessee or Kentucky or something now. And he, his new book, which is really good, his newest book, which is about like the stars. Yeah. And like,
I need to get to that soon.
Family novel. Like most of his books, there's a scientific part and then like a domestic part.
Right.
All right. Am I on number 4? Number 4?
We're on number 4. Let's wrap it up.
It's really hard for me to narrow this down. Since Evan mentioned poetry, I'm going to mention a book of poetry that I read that I really loved, which is called Airport Music by Mark Tardy. And I got to meet Mark last year. He came to the Ransom Center, and I'd actually bought one of his previous books before I met him, called The Circus of Trust, which was published by Dalkey Archive. And this was a really hard, weird book for me to read. Like, text is all over the page. It's like, what the fuck is going on in this book, The Circus of Trust? And I like parts of it that I could understand, but I felt like I wasn't smart enough to read a lot of it. And but then I got his...
I like a book that makes me feel dumb.
Well, I wouldn't say dumb. I'm just like challenged, maybe.
Yeah.
So then I got his book from 2013, which is called Airport Music, and it's pretty different. And I do read a lot of contemporary poetry. I subscribe to Poetry Magazine. I read all the poems in the New Yorker and the New York Review of Books, and follow a lot of poets on Twitter. And there's some whom I really love that I could name where I read everything they write. Gabrielle Calvo Caresi. I really love my friend Dan Beachy Quick. I read Ben Lerner's stuff. I could drop names on the poetry stuff, people that I really love, but most of it that I read in like just for fun is not good, is not memorable. Right. And it's like I'm looking for that hit when something is really good where I like copy it out by hand, memorize it, paste it. I love that. And what I like
Use your
about this book,
pencils.
what I love about this book from Mark Tardy called Airport Music is that it has some combinations of words in it that I've never read anywhere else. And this is something that poetry can do. It's something song lyrics can do. And you read a sentence and you're like, I've never read these words in that order before. And I think as a writer, that's really freaking hard to do. If you're writing every day, you're not going to have those moments of like pure inspiration and creativity every day. And I think poets are some of the ones who work really hard at doing that. Some of them who are working really hard. My critique on a lot of contemporary American poetry is that it's very much like a short story with line breaks. Like it's just a narrative. Like I was walking down the street, line break. I saw a woman with walking a basset hound, line break. That to me is like very different than what Mark Tardy is doing in this book.
Okay. Do you have a sample you could read us that sort of illustrates that?
Sure. I was going to read.
I know you like to underline your books and flag them. And all
I do. And he jumps around a lot where you'll think you'll know where a sentence is going, and you're like, wait, what the fuck? Like, I don't know. All right, this is the title poem called Airport Music. It says, nothing will absolve you of yourself. Not the train tracks a block away, not Zimny Piwo, which is Polish, or carefully manicured lawns, not the chairs that guard our parking spots, a cigarette necktie. Let X equal the amount of broken glass strewn across the sidewalk. Let Y equal the most hurried, the last. This brute contingency, that any breathing falls imperfect, half boarded up. There's no harm for anyone else in your mathematics. Thin negatives, slant black, never quiet, only graspless. Locked into the cut of a house. Let K equal a knot of people, expectant, sounding each other out. A drawn bath to deform water. A butcher's broom. It goes on. This is a multi-page poem, but it's very...
Kind of reminds me of like Tom York lyrics a little bit.
It's very unique.
Not far off, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's
cool. That sounds good.
Something that what I like about it too is I can go back and reread it. It's different reading it aloud for sure. It's very different on the page. And I'm always looking for more poetry recommendations. So if people have stuff, I promise to check it out if they want to recommend it.
Cool. Nice.
That was cool. I always love systems of false logic, or like, extremely rigorous approaches to nonsense.
Yeah. That's a great way to put that. I like it.
There's a fair amount of this.
Cool.
There's one poem that's like kind of a fucked up recipe, where it's like add 1 cup, purchase duck blood from the butcher. The blood will contain vinegar. If preparing own poultry, put half cup vinegar into glass bowl with blood to prevent coagulation. Set aside. It goes on. Like he uses a lot of that mathematical stuff in there, but
cool.
Anyways,
we should definitely be preventing coagulation at all costs.
I agree.
That's why we're here on this show. Yeah, it's our raison. Cool. My number 4 is a book called Autoportrait by Jesse Ball. This was recommended to us by Adam Levin on his like top 5 on our bonus episode that we did with him. And this book is like, it reminds me a lot of David Markson in the way that it's just like these kind of short vignettes. They're, you know, presumably autobiographical and just weird, like little stories of his childhood and his teen years and like things that he likes and doesn't like. And if you take this book at face value, that it's like completely true about him, like this guy is very odd, but in ways that are like funny and cool and like interesting, and you would really just want to hang out with him for a couple hours and just like get the read on him. And he teaches, I think, at was it Art Institute of Chicago? I might be getting that name wrong, but he's a creative writing professor. And like this book is just like so pleasant. And I remember I finished it on a bus coming home from Vancouver. I went to Vancouver for a competitive event, and I didn't do quite as well as I wanted to at it. And I was feeling kind of just like bummed out, but I was reading this book on the bus, and like by the time I finished it, I just felt like so at peace with the world and myself and my disappointment. And it just kind of like gave me this space to be like, it's okay to fail and it's not the end of the world. And like, I just have this like very euphoric memory of finishing this book on a bus. And I really enjoyed it all the way through. I messaged Adam. I was like, hey, I just finished Autoportrait. Thanks for this great recommendation. He goes, oh, that's funny. I'm actually at Jesse's house right now in Chicago, staying over the night. And I was like, holy shit, that's so random. Like, tell him thank you for his beautiful book. So Autoportrait by Jesse Ball. Really dug it.
Great recommendation.
The style of the book is that every sentence is like a random personal thing about him, and there's really not much structure to it. And I believe that either Adam said this or maybe the book jacket says this, is that he wrote the book in one day.
Yeah, I remember. I remember reading that and being like,
it's pretty short.
Incredulous about that, but
so he had read this book, which is the Autoportrait by Edward Levy, which translated by Lauren Stein, and it's the same thing. And he was like, I'm going to do my version of Autoportrait. So there's Autoportrait by Edward Levy, and then there's Autoportrait by Jesse Ball. And honestly, I think Jesse's book starts out much quicker. I found Eduardo Levy's book a little slower of a start, although it picks up significantly, and I found it really good by the end of it. I read the Jesse Ball book much faster. You could probably read it in like a matter of hours.
A day. Yeah, it's really short. Yeah. But it stuck with me.
All right, I'll do one more. I mean, I'm really debating because I feel like I have like 5 more I could talk about.
Totally.
But I think the one that I'm going to mention is this book, which is Ri Young, called Zol. And this is a book that I had never heard of until I walked into the bookstore, Half Price Books here in Austin, Texas, which you've been in with me, Dave, that Half Price Books.
Yeah.
And
that's a wonderful place to be.
I was sort of like, holy shit, Ri Young has a new book, because I only knew that of one book that he had done, which I had read, called Margarito and the Snowman, which had been published by Dalkey Archive Press. And I was like, I felt like that was the sort of under the radar book that I wanted to talk about. But this book is like a sequel to it. And it looks to me to be basically self-published, Tage Press. And again, I don't know anything about this guy. It turns out there's like 4 other books that he have, all kind of self-published. And I just feel like if there was any justice in the world, like this guy would be extremely well-known writer.
Oprah's Book Club.
Gotcha. I don't know about that, but he would be amongst people who like avant-garde literary fiction, you know? Yeah. And so these books are very hard to summarize, but they are significant because of the style. It's not so much the plot, the characters, the setting, all that stuff is good. It's harder to extract from the style. The style is really what the guy excels at. And I will read you a piece of it to give you a taste of it. Again, his name is like, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. It's just like capital R, capital E, Young, all one word. And apparently he lives in Austin, but I've never met him I would love to meet him. He's an interesting guy. I think he's a great writer. Part of what appeals to me about this book is what appealed to me about Novel Explosives is that it's some of it set in Mexico around drug cartels and the border. There's also a lot of stuff in it about films and making movies and cinema verite, and there's slapstick comedy in it. There's all kinds of, spelunking, just crazy shit in here, but it's like
Okay.
it's very well, like I say, the style of the writing is what makes it unique. And here's a taste of Zol. This is the first page, which is just a 1-page intro, kind of a standalone thing before you get to the characters.
Okay.
I haven't done practice this, so here we go. Oh, Margarito. It was a song on the radio. El éxito número uno. It was the sun's golden rays on the petals of a daisy. Mira que bonito. It was a people's cry for freedom. Escucha mi grito. But Margarito? Isn't that some kind of bebido? Tequila, Grand Marnier, crushed ice, salt on the rim, a teaspoon of sugar, and the juice of a limoncito? No, not margarita with a feminine but margarito with a decidedly masculine O. Oh, you mean Margarito, the bandito, with drooping mustachios and a marijuana cigarrito clenched between his teetho? The picture postcard Margarito in a serape and floppy sombrero leaning ay 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 against a spiny cactusito? Margarito el guapo, serenading his latest swoon with a plinky plunk guitarrito? Margarito in a toreador costume, waving his red cape in the bull ring. Ole, Matadorito! Margarito, the revolucionario, splashing across the Rio Grande on horseback in a blazing shootout with the federales. Viva Zapatorito! Margarito, squeezed, distilled, desphinctered out of 1,000 screaming childhood Saturday afternoon matinees of a grainy, crackling, and popping Technicolor big screen adventure. That Margarito? No, not that Margarito. Another Margarito in another time, in another place, somewhere south of the border, down old Mexico way, and beyond in a land ruled forever under the kingdom of the sun and called from ancient times in the ancient tongue by the single word Zol, which is the title of the book, Zol.
Mm-hmm.
So crazy, like
wow,
lyrical.
That is party time.
Writer. And like every page is different versions of this and jumps around into even different styles. Margarito and the Snowman is apparently the first book in the trilogy. Zol is the second one.
Okay.
I have not read the third one. He's got multiple other books, but I just feel like someone needs to buy his books and buy the rights to them and like republish them so that it gets a bigger audience. So I was very excited to see that.
That's awesome.
And speaking of Mexico, Evan, I think you read 2666 this year. I saw on your Instagram post. Yeah. How'd that land for you?
Well, it's an incredible book. It's, if anybody reading it or planning to read it should know that it's super violent.
Very part 2 is so disturbing, especially.
Yeah. I mean, in the center, it's like basically 400 pages straight of clinical descriptions of femicides. Yeah. And if it's possible to talk about, this book outside of that context, which is of course not, but like every other section is so good and propulsive, compelling, gorgeous. And then right in the center, we have like you're basically just taken to hell. Mm-hmm. So it's a strange book to talk about and to recommend. But I'm very happy that I read it. Mm-hmm. I think Bolaño is one of the most important authors for me. I really like his work, and I'd been long eyeing 2666. But
it's certainly an undertaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we've talked about the book and Bolaño on this before, but one thing I did not talk about in the past year I wanted to bring up was probably the last book of Bolaños published in English, which was this one, Cowboy Graves, which I wanted to write something about. I wanted to talk about on the show. I don't think I ever got around to it. So um,
Hmm.
I don't know when the right time is, but I actually really like Cowboy Graves, which is like three sort of two novellas and one short story and in a collection. And what you can tell from 2666 too is that there's a lot of overlap with his whole fictional universe. And
Yes.
the
Mhm.
piece is sort of like Amalfitano
Totally.
shows up in the spirit of science fiction. Arturo Bolano shows up. There's
Savage
a lot of
Detectives.
different
Yeah.
pieces. Like he didn't
Amulet
really,
he's in maybe too.
yeah, he wrote in these really kind of whirlwind
Mhm.
pieces that can connect the novels for his editors, but he didn't really worry about that. So there's a lot of fragments out there from 2666, or maybe with some crossover. So
Cool.
Okay, good to know.
Okay.
All right.
My final book. This is not an author that needs more publicity from us than he's already received on this show, but Liberation Day by George Saunders is a book that I read right at the tail end of the year. And big thanks to Penguin Random House for sending us copies of this for review. I love this book. Like anything George writes just kicks my ass in the best ways. Has anyone gotten to this one yet? I know it came out pretty late in the year.
I have not.
I have not. It's unread
It's
by me.
weirdly like this is his
Definitely
first
can't
short story
wait,
collection in 10 years, right?
Okay,
Which
wow,
is like
since 10th of December,
which
I
is
guess.
bewildering to like think about. It's been that long since his last short story collection, but like he's still the best at it. He's still so good at writing short stories, and the stories in this book are so bizarre. For example, in the first one, which is Liberation Day, kind of reminds me of Semplica Girl Diaries, where there's these people who are like put up on this person's wall, and they're speakers, and they sing and they perform plays, and he brings in like his rich friends into the audience, and these people are like they have an input in their skull that gets jacked in, and they like do these performances and they're essentially slaves where their brains have been like wiped out and they have no memory of their past life, and they just know that they've got a lot of money out of it to like give to their family or something, and the story goes in like weird directions from there. But like that's what Saunders does really well, is creates these like hyper capitalist hellscapes and just does very bizarre and funny things with them. There's another story in here where these people are like kind of in like a theme park, and they're like theme park, actors or whatever. Kind of like gives you back like a Civil War land in Bad Decline vibe a little bit. Yeah. But they're like in hell. It's like Dante's Inferno is like the theme park, and it seems like they're underground, but no visitors are ever coming through the park, but they're always practicing. And it almost has this like nuclear bunker vibe where they just live underground and they never see the light of day, and there's all these like intense parameters put on them by the people who run this place. Like these are the kinds of stories that are in this book, and it's wonderful, and I flew through it. It's quite short overall, and if you get a chance to get George's new one, it did not disappoint for me.
I think what I'm going to do, Dave, too, is put in a list of some other books that I read and liked in the show notes of this episode.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
If people want to go and look at that, I'll type some of that up.
Yeah.
Evan, if people want to find out more about Pinegrove, you have a website, is that correct? Pinegrove?
pinegroveband.com.
Awesome.
And they can sign up for an email newsletter. There's merch there. There's download Bandcamp. What else is there?
Well, I don't know. We're all over the internet, all of the digital streaming platforms. Yeah. If you want to see us play live, but you live in Brazil, you can watch on youtube.com. Yeah, I don't know. Pretty much all of the places that you would look to find a band's material,
they're there.
You look for us in those same places.
Nice.
Right. And
does Pinegrove have any tour plans for 2023 that you can speak of yet? And can I entice you guys to come play Victoria, British Columbia, Canada? Which is very close to Vancouver.
I would love to come to BC.
Nice.
But the answer is no. No plans. No plans.
That must feel kind of nice. Hey?
It does. It does. I have
Liberation Day. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
But yeah, I don't know. We're figuring out what the next move is, but there's some things that we're working on. We have a couple of live things, just like, we've already recorded them, but we're figuring out how to format and package them to make them fun to watch and listen to. Like I said, I have a few new songs, but I don't know. The answer is I don't really know.
Cool. Well, I hope I get to see you guys live someday. That'd be a real treat.
Yeah. Well, at very least, there's YouTube.com, as I mentioned.
That's true. Yes, I have spectated lots of your content live that way. That's great. And then your personal Instagram is Evan Stevens Hall, I think, right?
Yeah.
Where people can go for an annual book year in reading review.
Yeah.
Most of your posts tend to gravitate toward that.
I pretty much only post once a year at this point.
Yeah.
I used to take pictures and put them up, but I don't know. I'm just less and less interested in.
Yeah, I find that for myself too. Just like,
and yet I still waste so much time on it. How does that happen? I know that I don't even really like it or have that much fun, but
it's addictive.
But I find myself there all the time. My phone told me that last week I spent 5 hours daily on my phone.
Yeah.
So
you do post a lot of stories though from your.
I post stories. One. That's right.
Yeah.
I share memes.
I've long had this idea for a social network where you can only post once a year, and it has to be like a minimum of like 5,000 words. It's like
minimum. I like that.
Minimum. And it's like it's called christmasletter.com. It was I just made it up, but like how like there's some people like you used to only hear from once a year, like a Christmas letter. You'd get their Christmas card and be like, oh, I haven't heard from them all year. Here's your one chance, and it's like a 2-page letter. It's just like, here's what I did all last year. I kind of love that idea. So someone will do it eventually.
Can you only post in December or January? Can you post anytime throughout the year, but only once?
Only once a year.
But any month. I like it. That's cool.
Can you post one on December 31st and then one on January 1st? Or there has to be 365 days in between.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. 365
I like it. I'd back that. Mm-hmm. Cool.
I'd sign up.
Me too. Well, Evan, thank you so much for your generous time. Thank you so much for so eloquently walking us through your year in reading. We really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure having you on. And as a result of like leading up to the show, I listened to so much Pinegrove over the last like month or two. And I just thank you so much for your music and your work with the band. It's your stuff's wonderful. And I hope our listeners do a massive deep dive into Pinegrove after this.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Matt.
Also, we're going to hear a little more of Pinegrove and of your music.
It's so still. How'd you do that? You settled down my habitat. Downhill.
If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. And I want to put in a special plug for our Threadless merch store, which if you want to check out any of that, it's available on our website at concavityshow.com. I also want to give a plug for the upcoming DFW conference in June of 2023 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. If you are interested in hanging out with us, please plan on attending that. I will be there. You can find more info on that at dfwsociety.org. Once again, we want to thank Evan Stevens Hall for being here today. Pinegrove's music appears courtesy of Rough Trade Records and Evan Stevens Hall. And thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Across the state. of civil land in bad decline. I wanna see the present tense in retrospect, a monument been through benthic tides and vandalized before my eyes, before I die. Never forget, the t-shirt says, with no mask on.
See, only the true fans stick around until the very end. I wanted to mention one other side project I'm working on right now called Monthly Audio Newsletter, Mostly About Nothing. It's a kind of experimental audio collage thing, and if you want to check it out, you can search Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google or anywhere else for Monthly Audio Newsletter, Mostly About Nothing, and it'll come up. And let me know what you think. Email us at concavityshow@gmail.com and keep in touch.